Do you remember those forgotten 10-minute recipes from Grandma's old cookbook? They made busy days easier and kept families fed with almost nothing. How did we lose meals that simple and that important? Peanut butter and marshmallow sandwiches were one of those simple little joys that made their way into school lunches, church picnics, and kitchen tables across America. It did not take much. Just some soft sandwich bread, a good swipe of creamy peanut butter, and a generous helping of marshmallow fluff right out of the jar. The whole thing came together in under 10 minutes, but it stuck with you longer than that. It was sweet, sticky, and packed with that gooey marshmallow center that kids could not get enough of. Adults loved how fast and affordable it was, especially when grocery budgets were tight. You would spot this recipe scribbled on note cards, tucked into church cookbooks, or passed down by word of mouth from one busy home cook to another. It was a sugar rush, sure, but it was also a reminder of the quick comfort food that helped families stretch what they had. Funny how something that fast and that fun could quietly disappear from kitchen tables over time. Hot dog and baked bean skillet was one of those quirky 10-minute meals that could only have come from Grandma's old cookbook. You sliced up hot dogs, tossed them in a skillet, and poured in a can of baked beans. That was it. Dinner done. It sounds ridiculous now, but back when money was tight and every meal counted, this was comfort food at its quickest. The beans were filling, the hot dogs gave you just enough protein, and you could stretch one can to feed the whole family. Some folks got fancy with mustard or onions, but most kept it plain. It was the kind of dish that showed up after a long workday, when you were too tired to fuss with complicated recipes but still needed to put something on the table. It bubbled away on the stove, filling the kitchen with that warm, smoky smell that meant dinner was ready. Today, it feels like one of those meals we forgot on purpose, but for families back then, it was a lifesaver that showed up fast and kept bellies full. Tomato soup with cracker crumble was the ultimate quick fix when groceries were low and appetites were high. You heated up a can of tomato soup, crushed some saltines over the top, and called it a meal. It sounds basic, but it hit the spot. Grandma's cookbook was full of these quick, practical recipes that stretched every last pantry staple, and this one was no exception. The saltines soaked up the soup, adding just enough crunch and thickness to make it filling. Parents loved it because it cost next to nothing and came together in 10 minutes flat. Kids loved it because it was warm, salty, and familiar. You could always dress it up with a sprinkle of cheese or some pepper, but most families kept it plain and simple. It was the kind of meal you would find after school, in chilly weather, or on those nights when there just was not time for anything else. Fast, affordable, and quietly forgotten, like so many of the recipes tucked into the back pages of Grandma's old cookbook. Mayonnaise and pineapple salad might sound odd now, but back in Grandma's day, it was one of those quirky little recipes that everyone knew how to throw together in minutes. You grabbed a can of pineapple slices, plopped them on a plate, added a dollop of mayonnaise, and sprinkled on shredded cheddar if you had it. It was sweet, tangy, creamy, and surprisingly satisfying. Some folks added a cherry on top to dress it up, but most kept it plain and practical. You would see this salad at potlucks, church socials, or as a quick side dish on busy weeknights when dinner needed help stretching. It was fast, used ingredients people always had around, and filled that gap between sweet and savory in a way that only vintage recipes could. Today, people might wrinkle their noses at the thought, but back then, it was a 10-minute solution to hungry families and empty cupboards. Another forgotten gem from the cookbook that kept so many homes running. Egg salad on toast was one of those practical 10-minute meals that filled lunch boxes, fed tired workers, and showed up in every community cookbook for good reason. Leftover boiled eggs were never wasted. You chopped them up, mixed them with mayonnaise, maybe a little mustard if you were lucky, and piled it all onto a slice of toast. It sounds plain, but it got the job done. The eggs were filling, the toast made it portable, and you could whip it up in no time flat. This was not about fancy ingredients or gourmet flavors. It was the kind of recipe people leaned on when money was tight, time was short, and families still had to eat. You would see it at church luncheons, quick weekday dinners, or scribbled down on worn recipe cards tucked into kitchen drawers. It might be forgotten now, but egg salad on toast kept plenty of households going when they needed it most. Creamed corn and hot dog skillet might raise a few eyebrows today, but back then it was pure practicality in a pan. You sliced up hot dogs, tossed them in a skillet, and poured in a can of creamed corn. It bubbled and thickened in minutes, turning into this sweet, salty, creamy meal that filled everyone up fast. You would not find it in fancy cookbooks or glossy magazines, but you would definitely see it scribbled onto a recipe card tucked in Grandma's kitchen drawer. It made use of cheap pantry staples, stretched meat farther, and showed up on busy nights when nobody wanted to cook. Kids loved the weird sweetness, parents loved how far a can of corn could go, and it all came together in under 10 minutes. It sounds strange now, but for families watching every penny, it was comfort food that made do with what little they had. Another forgotten quick fix that quietly slipped off dinner tables over time. Cottage cheese and peach. Half plate was the kind of quick meal that felt just fancy enough to pass for lunch, even when the fridge was nearly empty. You opened a can of peach halves, plopped them on a plate, and added a big scoop of cottage cheese right in the center. That was it. 10 minutes, maybe less. It sounds odd now, but back then, this sweet and savory combo showed up at church teas, ladies' luncheons, and weekday meals when time and money were both running low. It was light, refreshing, and filled just enough of that hunger gap to get you through the afternoon. You could dress it up with a little sprinkle of nutmeg or a cherry on top if you were feeling fancy, but most kept it simple. It came from a time when canned fruit was a pantry staple, cottage cheese counted as protein, and families got creative to stretch every dollar. Another forgotten classic from the old cookbook that kept homes running smoothly. Fried bologna and mustard sandwich was a 10-minute fix that never pretended to be fancy, but always hit the spot. You tossed a slice of bologna into a hot pan, let it sizzle until the edges curled, slapped it onto soft bread, and added mustard. That was it. Simple, quick, and surprisingly satisfying. Back in Grandma's day, this showed up when money was tight, groceries were low, or you just needed something fast before heading back to work or school. It was salty, smoky, and the bologna crisped up just enough to feel like real cooking. Kids loved it, adults leaned on it, and every household had their own little spin on the recipe. Some added cheese, some toasted the bread, but most kept it plain and practical. You would not find this in glossy magazines, but you would find it tucked in those old handwritten cookbooks, passed down from one generation to the next. Another quick forgotten gem from a time when meals had to be fast, filling, and affordable. Saltine cracker stackers were the kind of quick, sweet snack that kept busy families going when there was not much else to work with. You grabbed some saltine crackers, spread on peanut butter, added banana slices, and drizzled honey over the top if you had it. 10 minutes, maybe less, and you had a snack that stuck to your ribs. This little recipe was everywhere back then, passed around in school lunchrooms, scribbled into community cookbooks, and tucked away in kitchen drawers for emergencies. It sounds simple now, but in a time when grocery budgets were tight and sweet treats were a luxury, saltine cracker stackers filled the gap. They gave kids energy, kept parents sane, and showed just how creative families could be with a box of crackers and a few pantry staples. It might seem forgotten today, but for plenty of households back then, this quick little snack was a lifesaver. Grape jelly meatball skillet might sound like a strange mix now, but back then, it was one of those quirky, sweet, and savory meals that showed up fast and stretched what little meat you had. You browned some mini meatballs in a skillet, poured in grape jelly and a splash of mustard, and let it all bubble together. In 10 minutes flat, dinner was ready. It was sweet, tangy, salty, and surprisingly filling. Families leaned on recipes like this because they turned a small amount of ground beef into a meal that felt bigger than it was. You could find this in old church cookbooks, clipped from women's magazines, or scribbled onto recipe cards tucked in drawers. It was not about fancy ingredients. It was about getting something warm, satisfying, and a little fun onto the table, fast. Today it feels forgotten, but back then, this sweet skillet meal kept homes running during the toughest weeks. Mayo and lettuce sandwiches were one of those simple, no-nonsense Depression-era meals that somehow filled you up when there was not much else to work with. You slapped some mayonnaise on soft sandwich bread, added a few crisp iceberg lettuce leaves, and called it lunch. That was it. It might sound plain today, but back when grocery shelves were bare and paychecks were stretched thin, this quick little meal showed up on a lot of kitchen tables. Families made do with what they had, and mayonnaise gave the sandwich some fat and flavor while lettuce added crunch and made it feel fresh. It was cheap, fast, and surprisingly satisfying when times were tough. You would see it scribbled onto old recipe cards or passed down through word of mouth as a quick lunch fix that cost next to nothing. These sandwiches are mostly forgotten now, but back then, they were a lifesaver that came together in under 10 minutes. Jelly roll-ups on white bread were a quick, sweet little snack that kept plenty of kids going when there was not much else to pack in their lunchbox. You took a slice of sandwich bread, rolled it flat with a rolling pin or a glass, spread on jelly, and rolled it up tight. That was all there was to it. It sounds simple now, but back then, this was the kind of treat that showed up when families had to stretch every dollar. It was fast, easy, and made use of pantry staples that were always on hand. You would find these roll-ups tucked into school lunches, brought to church picnics, or passed around as after-school snacks when groceries were running low. The jelly added sweetness, the bread kept it filling, and it all came together in just a few minutes. It might be forgotten today, but for plenty of families, these jelly roll-ups were a quick fix that kept kids happy and parents sane. Baked bean toasties were the kind of quick, hearty meal you could throw together with just a few ingredients and still feel like you had something warm and filling on the table. You toasted up some sandwich bread, heated a can of baked beans, and spooned them over the top with a sprinkle of shredded cheddar if you had it. It sounds basic, but when you were short on groceries and stretched for time, this meal worked wonders. The beans were filling, the toast added crunch, and the cheese made it all feel a little more special. You would see this simple meal show up in New England kitchens, packed into lunchboxes, or scribbled into old cookbooks full of fast, affordable recipes. It was not about being fancy. It was about getting something hot and satisfying on the table in under 10 minutes. Today, people might forget how handy meals like this were, but back then, baked bean toasties filled a lot of hungry bellies without breaking the bank. Quick macaroni and stewed tomatoes was one of those meals that showed up when there was not much left in the pantry, but families still needed dinner on the table fast. You boiled some elbow macaroni, opened a can of stewed tomatoes, and stirred it all together with salt, pepper, and a little butter if you could spare it. That was it. It sounds humble, but back when budgets were tight and grocery trips were rare, this simple stovetop meal came through. The pasta filled you up, the tomatoes added flavor, and it all came together in under 10 minutes. You would find recipes like this scribbled in old cookbooks, passed down from one generation to the next, or clipped from women's magazines that promised fast, filling meals on a shoestring budget. It might seem plain now, but quick macaroni and stewed tomatoes helped plenty of families stretch their groceries and make dinner happen, even on the hardest days. Mashed banana and mayo sandwiches might sound strange to modern ears, but back in the day, this sweet and tangy sandwich was a Southern staple that showed up in plenty of lunchboxes. You mashed up a ripe banana, spread it on soft sandwich bread, and added a swipe of mayonnaise. That was it. It was quick, cheap, and surprisingly filling. Families leaned on recipes like this when groceries were scarce and meals had to stretch. The banana added sweetness, the mayo gave it creaminess, and together they turned plain bread into a fast, satisfying lunch. You would find this sandwich scribbled in old community cookbooks, passed down at church picnics, or tucked into handwritten recipe boxes that lived in kitchen drawers. It might be forgotten now, but for plenty of folks growing up during hard times, this odd little sandwich was a reliable 10-minute fix when money was tight and hunger was knocking. Sardine and onion sandwiches were one of those quick, no-frills meals that filled hungry workers up fast and showed up in plenty of lunch pails across America. You opened a tin of sardines, laid them on rye bread, added some raw onion slices, and that was it. Simple, salty, and ready in under 10 minutes. It might sound harsh now, But back when protein was hard to come by and groceries were scarce, this was a go-to meal. The sardines gave you the protein, the onions added bite, and the rye bread kept you full. You would find this sandwich scribbled into old cookbooks, passed around among factory workers, or tucked into lunch boxes for folks heading out the door. It was never fancy, but it worked. Today, most people have forgotten how handy meals like this were, but back then, sardine and onion sandwiches helped plenty of families stretch what little they had and stay full through long, hard days. Egg in a whole toast was one of those fast, comforting breakfasts that managed to make plain old bread and eggs feel like something special in under 10 minutes. You would grab a slice of sandwich bread, cut a circle right out of the center, toss it into a hot skillet with a little butter, and crack an egg into the hole. That was all it took. The bread toasted up golden, the egg cooked right inside, and suddenly breakfast was on the table without much work or money spent. Families leaned on meals like this when mornings were hectic, paychecks were stretched thin, and everyone still needed a hot meal before heading out the door. It was a staple for school days, early church mornings, or whenever groceries were low but hunger was high. Some folks added cheese or herbs if they had them, but most kept it simple and practical. You would find egg in a hole scribbled on recipe cards tucked into faded cookbooks or passed down by word of mouth through generations. It might feel forgotten today, but back then, this quick breakfast trick kept countless families full, happy, and ready to face the day with just bread, eggs, and a hot skillet. Applesauce and cottage cheese bowls were one of those sweet, simple meals that came together in minutes, filling the gap between breakfast, lunch, or even dessert when there was not much to spare in the pantry. You would scoop a generous helping of cottage cheese into a bowl, spoon cool applesauce over the top, and maybe add a little cinnamon if you had some lying around. That was all there was to it. It sounds plain now, but back when groceries were scarce and money had to stretch, this quick little bowl was a lifesaver. It was light, cool, sweet, and packed with enough protein to hold you over during busy days. In the 1960s, families leaned on easy meals like this to keep things running, especially when both time and ingredients were in short supply. You would find this simple recipe scribbled in old cookbooks, shared between neighbors, or tucked into handwritten kitchen notes passed down through the years. Some folks dressed it up with fruit or nuts if they had them, but most kept it practical and affordable. It might be forgotten today, but applesauce and cottage cheese bowls kept plenty of households fed, happy, and full with little more than 2 everyday staples. Cold spaghetti with Italian dressing was one of those forgotten leftover tricks that stretched a single meal into something new without much time or money spent. You would take last night's spaghetti, rinse it off if needed, toss it in a splash of bottled Italian dressing, and that was dinner or lunch, ready in under 10 minutes. It sounds plain, but back then, this was an easy, thrifty way to keep food from going to waste and keep everyone fed. Families leaned on recipes like this when grocery lists ran short and leftovers became the next meal. The dressing added tang, the pasta filled you up, and it all came together cold, quick, and satisfying. You would find cold spaghetti with Italian dressing scribbled in community cookbooks, passed along at potlucks, or quietly traded between neighbors looking for affordable meal ideas. Some folks tossed in vegetables or cheese if they had any left, but most kept it simple and practical. It might feel forgotten now, but back then this cold pasta salad was a staple for families trying to stretch their meals, save their money, and still have something satisfying on the table without turning on the stove. Fried potatoes and onion skillet was a fast, hearty stovetop meal that showed up in countless kitchens when times were tough and bellies needed filling without much fuss or money. You would slice up potatoes, chop some onions, heat a little oil or butter in the skillet, and fry everything until golden and crispy. That was it. It sounds simple now, but back when groceries were scarce and time was short, this was a meal that worked. The potatoes filled everyone up, the onions added flavor, and the skillet turned humble pantry staples into something hot, hearty, and satisfying. Some folks added eggs, bacon, or herbs if they had them, but most kept it practical and affordable. You would find this recipe scribbled on old note cards, tucked into grandma's cookbooks, or passed down by word of mouth through generations of families who knew how to stretch every last ingredient. Fried potatoes and onions might seem forgotten today, but back then, it was a reliable fix for hungry families trying to make groceries last, keep dinner on the table, and survive the lean weeks when every meal counted just a little more. Peanut butter and sweet pickle sandwiches were one of those strange combinations that somehow became a regular part of vintage kitchen routines. You spread creamy peanut butter on soft sandwich bread, added sliced sweet pickles, and pressed it together. That was it. Quick, crunchy, and a little tangy with just enough sweetness to balance it out. It sounds odd now, but back then, it was a favorite for busy lunches, quick after-school snacks, or when there was not much else in the pantry. The peanut butter gave it richness, the pickles added bite, and together they made a sandwich that stuck to your ribs and kept you going. You would find this one scribbled in old recipe boxes passed around at church picnics or quietly tucked into Grandma's cookbook among the other quirky 10-minute meals. Families leaned on this recipe because it came together fast, filled you up, and used ingredients most people always had on hand. It might be forgotten now, but for plenty of households back then, peanut butter and sweet pickle sandwiches were a surprising lifesaver when time and money were both running short. Canned chili over saltines was the kind of quick meal that got dinner on the table fast with hardly any effort, especially when the cupboards were running bare. You opened a can of chili, heated it on the stove, and spooned it over a pile of saltine crackers. That was all there was to it. It might sound plain now, but back when budgets were tight and groceries were stretched thin, this quick, salty, filling meal showed up on plenty of kitchen tables. The saltines soaked up the chili, adding crunch and making a small amount of food go a whole lot farther. Some folks dressed it up with shredded cheese or onions if they had them, but most kept it simple and practical. You would find this recipe clipped from old magazines, scribbled in community cookbooks, or passed along by word of mouth from one busy family to the next. It was never about being fancy. It was about keeping everyone full with what little you had. Today, it is one of those forgotten meals. But for plenty of homes back then, canned chili over saltines made dinner happen fast. Rice and raisin pudding on the stove was a 10-minute dessert that turned humble leftovers into something sweet, filling, and comforting when times were tough. You scooped leftover rice into a pot, poured in milk, added sugar, tossed in some raisins, and stirred it all together over low heat. That was it. In minutes, the mixture thickened into a creamy, sweet pudding that could stretch a small amount of rice into a treat for the whole family. It sounds simple now, but back then, every leftover counted, and recipes like this helped families avoid wasting a single grain. You would find rice and raisin pudding scribbled onto recipe cards, tucked into community cookbooks, or passed down by word of mouth through generations. It was a clever way to stretch ingredients, keep kids happy, and turn plain staples into something that felt like dessert. Most folks kept it basic, but sometimes a sprinkle of cinnamon or a dash of vanilla would show up if the pantry allowed. It might be forgotten today, but for plenty of families, this quick stovetop dessert was a saving grace when groceries ran low and everyone needed a little sweetness. Tomato and sugar. Open-faced sandwiches were one of those quirky summer snacks that showed up when gardens were full, money was tight, and lunch had to be quick and simple. You sliced a fresh tomato, buttered a piece of bread, sprinkled sugar over the top, and that was it. A little sweet, a little juicy, and ready in minutes. It sounds strange today, but back then, this was a familiar plate across farm towns and small kitchens all over America. The tomatoes were easy to grow, the bread stretched what you had, and the sugar turned it into a treat that brightened up long summer days. Families leaned on recipes like this when grocery lists were short, and mealtime had to be stretched with what was already growing out back. You would find this simple snack scribbled in old cookbooks, passed around at neighborhood picnics, or taught to kids as one of their first kitchen lessons. It might seem forgotten now, but for plenty of folks back then, tomato and sugar sandwiches were a fast, filling reminder of how far a little garden and a little creativity could go. Cornflake crusted fried Bologna was one of those quick, crispy fixes that turned a plain slice of Bologna into a satisfying meal in no time flat. You dredged a slice of Bologna in crushed cornflakes, tossed it in a hot skillet, and fried it until the edges curled and the coating crisped up. That was it. No fancy ingredients, No complicated steps, just a fast, crunchy meal made from pantry staples. It might sound odd now, but back when budgets were tight and groceries had to stretch, this was a clever way to turn everyday Bologna into something that felt a little more special. The cornflakes added crunch, the Bologna sizzled up with salty flavor, and the whole thing came together in under 10 minutes. You would find this recipe scribbled into old cookbooks, passed around busy households, or whispered between neighbors looking for quick, affordable meal ideas. It might seem forgotten today, but for plenty of families back then, cornflake crusted fried Bologna was a fast, filling fix when time and money were both running short. Cinnamon sugar butter toast was the kind of simple comfort food that could brighten up an afternoon in under 10 minutes, especially when there was not much else to work with. You toasted up some bread, slathered it with butter, sprinkled on cinnamon and sugar, and called it a snack. That was it. Quick, sweet, and surprisingly satisfying when groceries were scarce and everyone needed a little pick-me-up. It sounds simple, but back then, families leaned on recipes like this to stretch ingredients and turn basic pantry staples into something that felt like a treat. The butter gave it richness, the cinnamon sugar added sweetness, and the toast made it crunchy enough to feel special. You would find this little recipe scribbled onto old note cards, tucked into community cookbooks, or passed down through generations as a fast, affordable way to keep kids happy and tummies full. It might be forgotten today, but for plenty of homes back then, cinnamon sugar butter toast was the perfect fix for long afternoons and short grocery lists. Green bean and egg salad was one of those quick, cold meals that filled plates fast and stretched what little food families had during tough times. You opened a can of green beans, sliced up some boiled eggs, tossed it all together with mayonnaise, and that was it. A little creamy, a little savory, and ready in under 10 minutes. It might not sound fancy today, but back then, this quick salad showed up at church potlucks, summer picnics, and weekday lunches when the pantry was running low. The eggs added protein, the beans filled you up, and the mayo brought it all together in a creamy, satisfying bite. Families leaned on recipes like this because they used simple ingredients that were always on hand and turned them into meals that kept everyone fed. You would find this one scribbled in old cookbooks, passed along by neighbors, or quietly tucked into Grandma's collection of quick meal fixes. It might be forgotten now, but for plenty of families back then, green bean and egg salad was a go-to plate that saved time, money, and groceries. Pimento cheese on Saltines was a southern staple that turned a few pantry ingredients into a quick, satisfying snack when groceries were running thin. You mixed up pimento cheese, usually some shredded cheddar, mayonnaise, chopped pimentos, and spread it over saltine crackers. That was it. 10 minutes or less, and you had something creamy, salty, and packed with flavor to hold you over until dinner. It might sound simple now, but back then, this little recipe kept homes running when budgets were stretched and time was short. The saltines gave it crunch, the pimento cheese added richness, and together they made a snack that showed up at school lunches, church picnics, or as a quick fix on busy afternoons. You would find this recipe scribbled onto old note cards, tucked in faded cookbooks, or passed down through generations of families who knew how to make the most of what they had. It might be forgotten today, but for plenty of folks back then, pimento cheese on saltines was a fast, filling favorite that saved the day more than once. Cold canned salmon salad was one of those quick, thrifty meals that turned an inexpensive pantry staple into a fast, protein-packed plate when groceries were running low. You flaked canned salmon into a bowl, stirred in mayonnaise, and chopped celery if you had it, and served it up cold. That was all there was to it. Fast, simple, and surprisingly satisfying when families needed something filling in a hurry. It might not sound exciting now, but back then, this recipe showed up in lunchboxes, on picnic tables, or tucked onto a dinner plate when meat was scarce and time was tight. The salmon added protein, the mayo brought it all together, and the celery gave it crunch if you were lucky enough to have some in the fridge. Families leaned on meals like this to stretch their groceries and keep everyone full without much effort. You would find cold canned salmon salad scribbled onto old recipe cards, passed down by neighbors, or quietly tucked into Grandma's collection of forgotten quick meals. It might be overlooked now, but back then this was a reliable 10-minute fix when money was tight. Hot milk cake. Slices with butter were a quick, sweet fix that turned leftover dessert into a satisfying breakfast or afternoon snack with hardly any effort. You sliced up leftover hot milk cake, toasted it gently or warmed it up, and slathered it with butter. That was it. 10 minutes or less, and you had a rich, soft, slightly sweet bite that kept everyone happy when groceries were tight and meals had to stretch. It sounds simple, but back then, this little treat was a kitchen staple, especially in homes that believed nothing should go to waste. The hot milk cake gave it sweetness, the butter added richness, and together they turned leftovers into something new and satisfying. You would find this recipe scribbled in old cookbooks, passed down through generations, or quietly shared between neighbors looking for ways to make every crumb count. It might be forgotten today, but for plenty of families back then, hot milk cake slices with butter were a warm, comforting reminder that even the smallest leftovers could be turned into something worth savoring. Maple syrup toast with warmed butter was the farmhouse kitchen's answer to rushed mornings when breakfast still needed to feel comforting, even if the fridge was nearly bare. You would toast a slice of bread, slather on warm butter, and drizzle real maple syrup over the top. That was it. Sweet, buttery, and ready in under 10 minutes. Families loved it because it was practical, made from pantry staples, and good enough to carry you through a long morning of chores, school, or factory work. Some folks added cinnamon, others kept it plain, but either way, it turned toast into something that felt a little indulgent. You could find versions of this in old rural cookbooks, passed down through generations of families who knew how to stretch groceries without cutting corners on comfort. Somewhere along the way, breakfasts like this disappeared under the weight of boxed cereals and fast food menus. But back then, it was one of those quiet meals that actually made mornings bearable. Funny how something so simple could be so easy to forget. Cottage cheese and pineapple plates were the go-to for a light summer dinner when turning on the stove felt like punishment. You would scoop a generous mound of cottage cheese onto your plate, plop some pineapple rings or chunks right alongside, and maybe toss in a saltine cracker or two if you were feeling fancy. That was dinner. It sounds a little strange now, but back then it was right there in every old cookbook, promising quick, budget-friendly meals that helped stretch the pantry and beat the heat. It was cold, creamy, and sweet. The kind of meal that made sure you stayed full without sweating over a hot skillet. For families trying to get by on tight paychecks, it was a lifesaver. And somehow, that odd combination of tangy cottage cheese and syrupy pineapple rings actually worked. It might not win any culinary awards today, but during those lean years, it was exactly the kind of practical magic you needed. Gone are the days when an elaborate breakfast demanded pans, spatulas, and endless cleanup. Ingeniously capturing the essence of a quick morning fix, microwave mug omelette merges practical convenience with a dash of culinary nostalgia. Many home cooks recall the 1970s introduction of the microwave, which revolutionized meal preparation and inspired an avalanche of rapid one-vessel recipes. By simply whisking eggs with diced vegetables, cheese, or herbs, and then heating them in a sturdy mug, anyone can achieve a fluffy, protein-rich breakfast in under 2 minutes. This technique, celebrated for its simplicity and accessibility, offers a minimal mess solution that resonates with busy individuals seeking a flavorful start to the day. Nutritional data underscores eggs as a reliable source of essential nutrients, and combining them with fresh add-ins boosts overall appeal. Taste and texture remain surprisingly satisfying, especially when warm cheese melts into every tender bite. The entire process harks back to an era when microwaves were cutting edge, and people yearned for labor-saving techniques without sacrificing home-cooked goodness. Cream cheese and jelly sandwiches were one of those quiet kitchen tricks passed down from old homemaker guides, perfect for rushed mornings when the fridge looked bare, but breakfast still had to happen. You would take soft white bread, spread on a swipe of cream cheese, and finish it off with grape jelly or whatever jam was on hand. That was it. Served cold or lightly toasted, it was fast, sweet, and filling enough to count. For a lot of families, this sandwich was a saving grace on mornings when eggs were too expensive and cereal boxes were empty. Cream cheese made it creamy, the jelly brought the sweetness, and together they turned plain bread into something that actually stuck with you through the morning. You could find versions of this recipe in old community cookbooks, lunchbox ideas, and school pamphlets reminding parents how to keep breakfast simple. Somewhere along the way, it got pushed aside by granola bars and frozen breakfast sandwiches, but back then, it was a 10-minute meal that worked every time. Funny how those easy, no-fuss breakfasts slipped through the cracks. Cheddar egg toast with pickle spears was proof that even with the bare minimum in your kitchen, you could still whip up a dinner that hit all the right notes. You started with plain sliced bread, cracked an egg over the top, sprinkled shredded cheddar cheese across the whole thing, and slid it under the broiler until the edges turned crisp and the cheese bubbled up. Add a pickle spear on the side, the sharper and brinier, the better, and suddenly dinner felt just a little more put together. This was the kind of meal that showed up in all those old spiral-bound cookbooks from the 1930s through the 70s. Fast, affordable, and surprisingly filling, it kept people going through lean years when even simple groceries felt like luxuries. Cheese, eggs, and bread might have been basic pantry staples, but when you combined them like this, it felt special enough to count. Families leaned on recipes like this because they worked. You could have dinner ready in under 10 minutes, and everyone stayed full. Those little meals did not need much, just heat, a little creativity, and whatever odds and ends you had lying around. Somehow, that was always enough. During wartime rationing, a square tin became a household staple and soon found its way into countless recipes. Spam fritters, introduced as a quick, budget-friendly meal, capitalized on the product's affordability and distinctive savoriness. The result combined convenience with a golden crunch, allowing families to transform humble slices of canned meat into a comforting treat. Battered and fried to perfection, these fritters delivered a surprising burst of flavor beneath their crisp exterior, appealing to those seeking both simplicity and nostalgia. Indeed, historians note that canned luncheon meat was first introduced in 1937, catching on due to its long shelf life and versatility. Some comedic enthusiasts even quip that Spam is the original instant classic, thriving under demanding conditions and limited resources. The popularity of Spam fritters skyrocketed during and after World War II when cost-effective ingredients were essential and every leftover was highly prized. In present times, this dish proves that resourcefulness can taste remarkably good, particularly when served with tangy dipping sauces or fresh sides. The crispy edges, tender interior, and hints of smoky saltiness highlight the enduring attraction of a recipe that has traversed decades. Quick cheese grits with fried egg was the Southern shortcut breakfast that filled diners and home kitchens when mornings were short, but you still needed something hot and hearty. You would cook instant grits, stir in shredded cheese, fry an egg on the side, and layer it all in a bowl. Breakfast was done in under 10 minutes, but somehow it stuck with you all morning long. Families loved it because grits stretched far, eggs were easy to get, and a little cheese turned the whole thing creamy and filling. Southern diners kept it on the menu for quick weekday breakfasts, but this one lived quietly in home kitchens too. Practical, simple, and comforting. You could find versions of it scribbled in old cookbooks, tucked between biscuit recipes and gravy tricks, passed down by folks who knew how to make breakfast work without much fuss. Somewhere along the way, cheese grits and eggs faded under the pressure of new trends. But back then, this breakfast quietly carried people through long days. Potted meat spread on Ritz crackers was one of those pantry dinners that proved fast, salty, and filling could all happen in under 10 minutes. You popped open a can of potted meat, scooped it straight onto Ritz crackers, and that was dinner. It could be served cold, right from the can, or warmed up if you wanted to make it feel a little fancier. But most folks just ate it plain. The creamy, salty spread paired with buttery crackers was oddly comforting, especially on busy nights or after long days when there was no time or energy to cook. Old cookbooks were packed with tricks like this, budget meals that filled you up with nothing but pantry staples and some creativity. Potted meat might not sound glamorous now, but it lasted forever in the cupboard and made dinner happen when groceries ran low. These little cracker meals were fast, filling, and made the best of tight times. Funny how a can of mystery meat and a box of crackers could still count as dinner and leave you full. Some consider grilled cheese the ultimate comfort sandwich, but there's an old-school spin that adds a refreshing surprise. Retro grilled cheese with a twist merges timeless nostalgia with modern flair, making it a swift option for busy weeknights. Historically, grilled cheese soared in popularity when affordable sliced bread and processed cheese took center stage during the mid-20th century, appealing to families seeking easy, budget-friendly meals. The fundamental pairing of molten cheese and crisp, buttery bread remains irresistible, yet this variation introduces tomato slices or aromatic herbs, imbuing new layers of flavor and texture. It's not rocket science, but it might just make you a local legend among your neighbors. Experts note that tomatoes contribute a juicy brightness, offsetting the richness of melted cheese, and the potential for creative add-ons is endless. Many appreciate the speed at which this sandwich can be prepared, typically in less than 10 minutes, satisfying urgent cravings without sacrificing taste. Lining up these ingredients on the countertop and warming a skillet or griddle seamlessly fits the pace of modern life. Crispy rice cereal with sliced banana and evaporated milk was one of those fast, forgotten breakfasts straight out of government-issued recipe guides and frugal homemaker magazines from decades past. You would pour a bowl of crispy rice cereal, slice a banana over the top, and finish it with canned evaporated milk instead of fresh milk. Breakfast was done in under 10 minutes. Ready before the school bus pulled up or the factory whistle blew, it was practical, affordable, and quietly comforting in its own way. Families leaned on breakfasts like this when groceries ran tight, but everyone still needed something filling to start the day. Evaporated milk was shelf-stable, bananas stretched a meal, and cereal brought the crunch. You will not find this version on menus today, but back then, it was one of those small tricks that kept mornings moving without much fuss. Somehow, even the humblest breakfasts had a way of sticking with you, until they disappeared. Baked bean and Frankfurter cups were one of those dinners that showed up when parents needed something fast, cheap, and guaranteed to make the kids smile. You sliced up hot dogs, stirred them into a bubbling pot of canned baked beans, and let the whole thing simmer together until it smelled good enough to fool everyone into thinking dinner took effort. You could scoop it into bowls or coffee mugs, hand everyone a spoon, and dinner was done before anyone had the chance to complain. This recipe came straight from those old community cookbooks and church bulletins, the ones filled with quick fixes and budget meals for families running on empty. It was salty, sweet, and hearty enough to stick to your ribs after a long day of work or school. Those beans and franks might not have been gourmet, but they filled the kitchen with warmth, and for 10 minutes of effort, that was a win. You would see this recipe clipped onto fridge doors or scribbled on index cards, passed down because it worked. It was comforting, cheap, and faster than takeout. A classic for busy homes making the best of what the pantry had left. Bubbling cheese and sizzling tortillas often bring back fond memories of quick comfort food shared among friends or family. 10-minute quesadillas have risen to prominence as a fast, satisfying option, merging convenience with the vibrant flavors of Mexican-inspired cooking. Culinary historians trace the origins of the quesadilla back to colonial Mexico, when indigenous corn tortillas combined with European cheese to create a versatile dish prized for its minimal ingredients. Modern home cooks appreciate the simplicity of tossing shredded cheese and optional fillings, such as chopped peppers, leftover chicken, or sautéed onions, between two tortillas, then heating them until gooey in a skillet or on a griddle. The quick assembly allows even the busiest households to enjoy a warm, satisfying meal without extensive preparation. Some folks jokingly refer to this recipe as the emergency dinner lifesaver, while nutrition experts highlight that using whole wheat tortillas and lean proteins can enhance its health factor. Emphasizing both speed and nostalgia, these quesadillas recall those carefree family nights when children hovered around the kitchen, eager for every melty bite. Quick cornmeal. Mush was one of those Depression-era breakfasts that showed up in every rural cookbook and farmhouse kitchen when groceries ran low, but mornings still demanded something hot and filling. You would stir cornmeal into boiling water, cook it down to a thick, creamy consistency, and top it with butter, syrup, or even just a pinch of salt. Breakfast was done in 10 minutes flat, and somehow it stuck with you for hours. Families loved it because cornmeal was cheap, easy to store, and stretched into a satisfying meal without much effort. Some folks called it polenta, others called it mush, but it always worked the same: practical, no fuss, and surprisingly comforting. It filled bellies through winters, long work days, and school mornings when cereal was not an option. You could find versions of this recipe in old homemaker magazines, church fundraisers, and even government pamphlets reminding families how to get by with less. It is one of those breakfasts that quietly disappeared, replaced by boxed mixes and quick-fix meals. But back then, it kept people going. Cracker-crusted sardine patties were about as close to seafood night as most working families ever got when money was tight. You would mash up a can of sardines, crush some saltine crackers, and mix the two until it held together just enough to form a patty. That patty went straight into a hot skillet with a little oil, frying up crisp on the outside and soft in the middle. It was not a fancy fish fillet from the market, but it was hot, salty, and filled your stomach fast. These little patties showed up all over those old cookbook pages from the 1930s to the 1970s because they were reliable, cheap, and fast. Most families topped them with mustard or a spoonful of relish, whatever scraps were left in the icebox. Nobody expected restaurant fare. These were survival meals dressed up to look halfway decent. Sardines were affordable, packed with protein, and did not spoil in the cupboard, which made them a go-to when you had to feed everyone with pennies to your name. In a world where quick meals often reign supreme, few dishes marry efficiency with broad appeal as effortlessly. 10-minute chicken salad offers a swift solution for lunch or dinner, delivering hearty flavor without prolonged preparation. Culinary historians trace the general concept of chicken salad back to 19th-century American cookbooks, though it gained greater traction in households once conveniently pre-cooked poultry became commonplace. Creamy dressing, crisp celery, and succulent meat provide an enjoyable interplay of textures, while the addition of fresh herbs or a sprinkle of pepper imparts a gentle lift to each bite. Certain enthusiasts quip that it's the ideal way to use up leftover produce and still come across like a gourmet magician. Nostalgia surfaces in memories of summer picnics, when this simple dish reliably pleased children and adults alike. Economical ingredients keep it accessible, appealing to those who recall an era when wasting food was frowned upon and clever resourcefulness thrived. Modern shortcuts, such as rotisserie chicken or prepared veggies, further underscore its speed and convenience, ensuring that even packed schedules can accommodate a homemade meal. Ketchup fried rice was one of those odd shortcut dinners that turned pantry scraps into something hot and surprisingly satisfying. You started with cold leftover rice, tossed it in a hot skillet with chopped onions, and stirred in a few big spoonfuls of ketchup. That was it. If you had leftover meat like ham or chicken, you diced it up and threw it in too. It was tangy, salty, a little sweet, and filled you up fast when there was not much else in the fridge. This recipe showed up in old cookbooks from the 1950s through the 70s, a quirky little trick that stretched leftovers and made dinner happen in 10 minutes flat. It was not fancy, but it worked, especially for families juggling tight paychecks and even tighter grocery lists. You might not see ketchup fried rice on menus today, but back then, it was a practical fix for busy nights and bare pantries. It turned scraps into something warm, filling, and oddly comforting. Funny how the strangest combinations sometimes stick with us the longest. Cottage cheese on toast with pineapple rings was the kind of retro breakfast you would find tucked inside those glossy 1970s women's magazines, always advertised as light, quick, and just fancy enough to feel like you tried. You would toast a slice of bread, scoop on some cottage cheese, and crown the whole thing with a pineapple ring straight from the can. It sounds odd now, but back then it was practical, filling, and passed off as health food, sweet, salty, creamy, and done in under 10 minutes, perfect for busy mornings or when groceries were running low. Housewives loved it for its simplicity, and teenagers liked it for being something different than plain old toast. You could find versions of this popping up at brunch tables, church socials, or just in quiet kitchens trying to stretch a meal. Somewhere along the way, it disappeared under the weight of new diet trends and breakfast bars, but at the time, it was a fast, no-fuss meal that worked. Vienna sausage omelet rolls were the quick, clever way families turned pantry food into dinner when the fridge looked bare. You sliced up those little Vienna sausages, tossed them into a hot skillet, and poured whisked eggs right over the top. As the eggs set, you rolled them up like a little omelet wrap, cut it in half if you wanted, and dinner was ready before anyone had time to ask what was cooking. Old cookbooks were filled with recipes like this, fast meals that used up canned staples and turned them into something hot, salty, and filling. You could spoon a little relish on top, serve it with crackers, or keep it plain, but no matter how you fixed it, it hit the spot. Vienna sausages were cheap, easy to store, and lasted forever in the pantry, which made them a go-to when fresh meat was hard to come by. These omelet rolls were not fancy, but they filled you up and got dinner done without much effort. Meals like this stuck around because they worked. They made the most of what little you had, and sometimes that was more than enough. Captivating sweet tooths for generations, this modern spin on an old-fashioned treat exudes practicality at every step. Microwave apple crisp soared in popularity once microwave ovens found their way into everyday kitchens during the 1970s, granting families a shortcut to indulge in warm, fruit-filled desserts. Some comedic souls dub it the orchard in a bowl for the time-pressed crowd, highlighting how swiftly fresh apples transform under a blanket of buttery oats, sugar, and cinnamon. Historically, variations of fruit crisps date back to at least the early 1900s in the United States, but never before had they been prepared in mere minutes. While the microwave's arrival revolutionized countless recipes, this comforting dessert retains the hallmark aroma of baked apples and spiced topping, ensuring a pleasing contrast between tender fruit and crumbly crust. Culinary experts confirm that apples supply essential nutrients, underscoring its practical appeal for health-conscious dessert lovers. Its simplicity ensures that even novices can assemble it swiftly, combining pantry staples such as oats, flour, and sugar. Texture remains a major draw, with each spoonful delivering warmth, softness, and subtle crunch. Ultimately, it stands as an inviting reminder that effortless preparation can harmonize seamlessly with satisfying sweetness in a single dish. One-pot macaroni and tomatoes was probably the easiest dinner anyone could pull together when the cupboards were running low. You boiled up elbow macaroni, dumped in a can of stewed tomatoes, added a pat of butter if you could spare it, and that was it. It came straight from those old Depression-era cookbooks, the ones stained with years of spills and handwritten notes. This was survival food, plain and simple, but it never pretended to be more. The tomatoes gave just enough sweetness to balance the salty pasta water, and that sprinkle of black pepper over the top made it feel complete. Families leaned on meals like this because they stretched what little you had, and you could serve every last person at the table without wondering how you were going to afford groceries next week. It was quick, hot, and filled you up when you needed it most. The old cookbooks called it economical, but for most folks, it was just Tuesday night. Funny how something so simple stuck around for generations. Wheat germ and yogurt bowls were the health kick of the 1970s that snuck their way into forgotten cookbooks and quick breakfast guides. You would scoop some plain yogurt into a bowl, toss on a spoonful of wheat germ, maybe drizzle honey or sprinkle nuts if you had them, and breakfast was done in minutes. It was quick, packed with protein, and felt ahead of its time back when most breakfasts were still sugar-heavy cereals or toast. The health-conscious crowd loved it because it kept you full, parents liked it because it was easy, and even the kids got on board, mostly because the yogurt cut through the plain, nutty taste of wheat germ. These bowls were everywhere in the 70s, showing up in homemaker magazines, diet guides, and those community cookbooks with spiral bindings. But like a lot of forgotten breakfasts, they slipped away when trends shifted. Now it is all smoothie bowls and protein shakes. Fried Bologna and mashed potato bowls were what happened when leftovers met desperation, in the best way. Bologna was cheap, salty and easy to fry up in a hot pan until the edges curled just right and got that crispy golden ring. Leftover mashed potatoes were scooped into a bowl, topped with the hot Bologna, and if you were lucky, drowned in ketchup, gravy, or whatever sauce was hiding in the fridge. It was not about being fancy. This was survival food pulled straight from those old creased cookbooks every family tucked away in the kitchen drawer, the ones stained with coffee rings and margarine smudges. No one expected it to be restaurant-worthy, but that salty bite of Bologna with creamy potatoes stuck to your ribs after a long, hard day. It filled you up fast and made use of whatever scraps were left from last night's dinner. When you only had 10 minutes and not a penny to spare, this meal was a lifesaver. Shredded lettuce and tuna salad wraps were one of those dinners that showed up when the heat made cooking feel impossible. You scooped canned tuna salad straight into crunchy iceberg lettuce leaves, added a few slices of pickle for good measure, and called it dinner. It was cold, crisp, and came together in under 10 minutes with barely any cleanup. These wraps showed up in old cookbooks for a reason. They were cheap, fast, and refreshing when summer turned the kitchen into an oven. You could dress them up with a little extra mayo or mustard, but most folks kept it plain. The lettuce added crunch, the tuna filled you up, and the whole thing made dinner happen without turning on the stove. It was practical, quick, and surprisingly satisfying when the weather left you with no energy to cook. These dinners were the kind that helped families survive hot nights and long days when the grocery list felt short and the pantry felt even shorter. Funny how the simplest meals are the ones we remember longest. During the mid-20th century, as families juggled busy schedules and searched for simpler mealtime options, a fuss-free favorite quietly took center stage. Known as tuna cracker salad, this quick combination of canned tuna, diced pickles, and creamy mayonnaise served atop crunchy crackers delivered both convenience and an unexpected burst of flavor. Culinary historians trace the ascent of canned tuna to World War II rationing, when it provided an affordable protein source for countless households. Generations soon embraced the practice of enhancing that basic fish mixture with tangy ingredients, creating a versatile snack or light lunch that required minimal effort. Some observers humorously dubbed it the fastest catch of the day, pointing to how swiftly it can be assembled compared to more elaborate meals. Meanwhile, texture emerges as a central point of appeal, blending the delicate smoothness of seasoned tuna with the crisp snap of the cracker. Nostalgia lingers in each bite, conjuring memories of after-school gatherings or casual potluck get-togethers where practicality reigned supreme. Hard-boiled egg and buttered saltine platters were how families turned simple fridge staples into a protein-packed dinner when groceries ran thin. You boiled a few eggs, sliced them up, and laid them out over a plate of buttered saltine crackers. That was dinner. It sounds plain, but when times were tight and there was no time to cook, it filled you up fast. The saltines added crunch, the butter gave richness, and the eggs brought protein that kept you going. This little meal showed up in old cookbooks and handwritten recipe cards because it was practical, affordable, and came together with what most people already had on hand. You could add black pepper or a little hot sauce if you wanted to dress it up, but most folks kept it plain. These were the kinds of dinners that got families through lean times, stretching groceries and keeping bellies full with almost no effort. Funny how a few crackers and eggs could feel like enough when the clock was ticking and the cupboards looked bare. Tomato juice and a toasted English muffin was the stripped-down breakfast of every vintage weight loss guide and old cookbook trying to keep mornings fast, efficient, and low-calorie. You would pour a glass of chilled tomato juice, toast an English muffin, maybe spread a little butter if the diet allowed, and that was breakfast. It was basic, practical, and done in under 10 minutes. Back then, this was advertised as a smart start to the day, simple, savory, and filling without much effort. Housewives, office workers, and even students were told this meal would keep you going without weighing you down. It showed up everywhere from hospital diet plans to homemaker magazines, quietly filling bellies long before protein shakes and pre-packed bars took over. The tomato juice gave a little bite, the English muffin brought warmth, and together they were enough to start the day when time and groceries were tight. It is one of those breakfasts nobody brags about now, but it quietly got families through busy mornings without all the bells and whistles. Sautéed canned corn and scrambled eggs was the kind of meal you whipped up when the pantry looked bare, but you still wanted dinner to taste halfway decent. It came together in 10 minutes flat. You drained a can of sweet corn, tossed it in a skillet with butter, and let it sizzle until the kernels softened and browned just a little around the edges. Then you cracked in a few eggs, scrambled them together, and dinner was done before anyone could ask what was cooking. Old cookbooks loved recipes like this because they were fast, cheap, and practical. You could eat it plain or sprinkle on some salt and pepper to dress it up. The sweetness of the corn with the soft, buttery eggs made a surprisingly good combination. It was filling enough to pass for dinner, but easy enough to feel like you barely lifted a finger. These were the meals that stretched the grocery budget, kept families full, and made sure nobody went to bed hungry. It might not have been fancy, but back then, fancy was never the goal. Getting by was. Tell us which forgotten recipe you would try, and do not forget to like and subscribe for more Lost Kitchen favorites.